Let's move on and just discuss a little bit about hydrology-related disasters, especially thinking about tropical cyclones. In general, as we mentioned, there's sunlight coming in that's driving the hydrologic cycle, and it's causing water to turn to vapor and then ultimately to rise. And so energy is being absorbed, taken in by the water in that process. And then as vapor turns back to water, it's going to release that energy. And as it releases that energy, it creates these quickly circulating storms. So thunderstorms, there are high winds, they're energetic, there's a lot of lightning, and that is because the energy, as that water turns from vapor back to liquid, that energy that ultimately came from the sun is now being released. Where you have lots of warm water and lots of sunlight driving that hydrologic cycles, that means that you can generate big, really powerful storms. In general, we call them tropical cyclones, but when they get very large, especially the ones that hit us in the US, we're going to call those hurricanes. We might call them typhoons out here. They're names for the same thing. They are strong tropical cyclones that are ultimately driven by the energy of the sun hitting the equator and creating these big systems of rotating thunderstorms there. And they have a seasonality to them. So August to October is the main hurricane season in the eastern US. And then hurricanes can be generated elsewhere in the northern hemisphere, sort of in the same summer-ish months. And then in the southern hemisphere, it's actually opposite because northern hemisphere summer is the same as southern hemisphere winter, and northern hemisphere winter is southern hemisphere summer. So at any rate, these tropical cyclones are being generated at the end of the summertime. These include very destructive storms such as Hurricane Katrina. It's famous because of how it hit New Orleans about 15 or so years ago as of today, and I guess 17 years ago, wow, and caused major devastation because it ended up overtopping a lot of the levees in that area. Tropical cyclones, that term I've been using, refers to systems of thunderstorms, get their energy from the sun ultimately. They're special because they are rotating and because they have high wind speeds and they originate in the tropics. If their wind speed is below 39 miles an hour, they are called tropical depressions. From there up to 74 miles an hour, they're called tropical storms. And then above that, they are called hurricanes. So the way that we distinguish between these is by wind speed. And so that faster wind means that there's more energy in that storm that's being released by that storm. And we've seen this before, but I'll mention it again, that the scale that we can use to classify hurricanes is called the Saffir-Simpson scale. So that is our categories of storms. So category 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 hurricane are all governed by the wind speed. And those are correlated to the damage that results from those hurricanes, but it's not a perfect correlation. So low wind speeds, relatively low, you're still nearly 100 miles an hour in wind speed are going to be your category 1 storms. Up to category 5s have wind speeds of over 150 miles an hour. To get a sense of some of the damage that can result from these, Hurricane Hermine in 2016, here's some of the worst damage that happened from that. You can get trees falling over and doing damage to houses. Certainly this is going to be tens of thousands of dollars on this one house, but it didn't level the house and it didn't knock down all the trees and it didn't destroy everything in the neighborhood. So this is in the neighborhood of what a category 1 storm is capable of. Category 3 storms, those are tough because they can just blow the roofs right off houses. And so then you end up soaking everything inside and your house can more or less be a total loss if the roof gets ripped off. Some of the most dangerous places to be in hurricanes are mobile homes where you don't have a really sturdy structure to rely on. Your roof can get easily pulled off, and especially when you don't have a basement to escape to should you need to. Category 5 storms, though, they really don't care very much what you're built out of. They can just totally level houses. So this is a mobile home park here that has been totally leveled by this Hurricane Andrew in 1992. If a hurricane or Category 5 hurricane is incoming, you really should not be there when these things hit because of this sort of devastation that can result. So that sort of damage can be pretty far inland from the storm. Whereas if you're right on the coast, you get extra damage due to something we've already talked about, which is storm surge, a type of flood that is resulting because the hurricane is pulling up water underneath it and causing the sea level to essentially be higher as that storm approaches. And so you can end up flooding big coastal areas, regardless of what your category of storm is. So Category 1 storm here, really a pretty small hurricane, as we might say, but it flooded these whole towns. And then Category 3 storm, Hurricane Katrina, really just totally overtopped the roofs even in these neighborhoods in around New Orleans. To review what the storm surge is talking about, remember that you have storms that are low pressure systems, and so water can bulge up underneath them. And then you might also add in high tide at the worst part of that storm, so that the high tide, which is driven by the moon, right? The tides are driven by gravity. They add together and make a total storm tide that is much higher than the normal high tide would be. And as a result, it can flood pretty far inland, depending on what the topography is locally. We can see some of those storm surge effects after the storm has even receded. A lot of that water is still sitting on the land surface and flowing off pretty slowly, but it has inundated everything around this in New Orleans after Katrina. And in addition, that storm surge can do damage like this, where it has just totally leveled these neighborhoods. Here's a map of where some storms have hit, at least over the past several decades. And we have here a diagram based on both Saffir-Simpson category and location. And so we can see that hurricanes have really peppered the Gulf Coast. They've missed parts of Florida for the most part, but they've hit southern Florida a fair bit, and they've hit the coasts of North and South Carolina a lot. They sort of have not hit the mid-Atlantic very much, although they have hit Long Island and up into New England some. And that's because of the trajectory of these storms, right? They're mostly coming from the south and the east, and so they end up hitting things along the Gulf Coast pretty easily, but the northern part of Florida ends up sort of sheltered from most of those hits. North Carolina and South Carolina can take direct hits, but there are less opportunities for this area to be hit with a direct hurricane, although it's certainly possible. And we're probably overdue for a hurricane to hit somewhere in the mid-Atlantic region. The category of the hurricane is not the only thing that controls how much damage results from them and how deadly they are. If we look at the list of the deadliest Atlantic hurricanes, we'll see that there's a Category 2 storm pretty far up there that caused 8,000 deaths. And that's because where these things make landfall, the population density is going to matter, who left and who stayed is going to matter, the development level, so how strong the buildings are and how well they're built there is going to matter. So it's not just the hurricane strength, but it's also the other conditions of human settlement in those places that are going to govern how damaging those hurricanes are. All right, folks, thanks for sticking around. I'll see you online.